This right here is the newly overhauled Surron XX Build. In part 1 of this overhaul, the big items we did were a KO RS motor, paired with a KO Pro Series controller, EBMX 72V 42 amp hour battery, EXT Arma Shock, Hayes Dominion A4 brakes, and several Warp 9 hard parts. Throughout the process, we ran into a few issues getting this bike finished up, and we also had a couple more things to add for this Part 2 segment. Starting off, we swapped the Fox 40 fork for the new EXT Ferro Fork. Next, we swapped the 1916 wheel set for a Warp 9 2118 with their 220mm rotors, and we kept the 54-tooth sprocket. We got the new V2 Warp 9 triangle installed, which is restyled with neoprene washers to help keep dirt and water out of the pivot bearings. We also swapped the Warp 9 1.5-inch lift linkage for the 0.75-inch linkage. We changed out the bars for black Warp 9 handlebars, a Warp 9 bar clamp, stem lock, handguards, and we added the speedometer relocation kit. We also did Warp 9 pegs, Warp 9 adjustable foot peg mounts, and a Warp 9 titanium axle and rear disc guard. Last but not least, we're trying out the new GritShift heavy hitter skid plate. Before I went out for my ride, I set the sag on the shock using the Motool Slacker. If you don't already have one of these, it's an awesome tool to have. I also set my fork to these settings based on my riding style and weight. 100 psi in the main chamber, high speed compression 10 clicks from closed, low speed compression 9 clicks from closed, rebound middled out at 11 clicks, and 150 psi in the ramp chamber. Now that we've got everything set up, let's go for a ride.
Ooh, there's the 21 hitting the fender there. I'm not even on the trail yet, and I am impressed. Actually, one thing I forgot to do before we keep rolling here, I want to throw this ring up, see how much of the travel I'm using. Oh man, it's a fun one. You've heard me say it before, and I'll say it again right now, but first impressions, to me, are always super accurate. And my first impression right now is pretty excited about this setup right now. Oh man. So I just took the GritShift guys for a ride out here on my trails, and they agreed that this stuff does not look nearly as rough or technical or as much elevation change as it actually is in the videos, but I just say that because these little rocks can be really rough on the body and deflect a lot. And I'm just saying that because sometimes I don't like riding Surrons up here, Surron Lightbees at least, because I just get rocked around too much. And I'm telling you right now, I've not felt this confident on a Surron in terms of suspension. This thing is immediately exceeding my expectations. And I think that's what a lot of people were curious about. Is this fork overhyped? Is it really as good as everybody's claiming it could be or is? My first impressions right now are, yeah, believe the hype. This thing is so nice. Ooh, just took a branch right to the face. Went right through my goggles. All right. So I didn't do any big hits on that, but just in that quick bit, you can see still have about 2.5 inches, I'd say, of travel left to use. So let's keep riding it and see if it stays there. The tune on this bike is interesting. I'm still kind of getting used to it, but I really like it. I was surprised to hear that some people were really hating on the KO stuff, because I'm honestly finding it to be pretty nice.
I will say, custom tuning the KO controller does take some time to understand, and it can be a little intimidating to dial in the correct settings.
So one guy wrote me and told me that he was disappointed in me for not pointing that out with the KO equipment, but you know, I'm here to tell you what I feel when I ride something, and that's what I've always done. If it feels good, I tell you. If it feels bad, I tell you. And I like this setup. Am I saying it's better than an X9 or a BAC 8000? No, I'm not saying that. Those are also both great controllers, and you can set these things up so different. I think that the GritShift guys have put ample time on these bikes testing this stuff. They gave me a tune on this controller that they like. I wrote it, and go figure, I like it too. So that's what I'm going to tell you about. There is a little bit of lag in the throttle, but the way this tune's set up is pretty awesome in that regard, because it's just soft. If we're going slow, like, you're not going to get jerked around too much. But when you lean into it more and grab a handful, like, it just hooks up and has tons of power. Oh man, I'm really noticing it on those bigger hits right there. Like, not that that's a big hit, but it's like kind of a big G out, whoop. Oh, that's where this fork and shock are so good. Yeah. You notice it everywhere, but it just doesn't blow through the stroke and feel harsh like every other Surron fork I've ridden. I'll say the closest one that I can compare it to is the Fast Ace tuned fork that Charge tuned for me. And that made a big difference, that fork. It was definitely the best one that I've ridden yet. That's like the mountain bike style fork. But that fork still has its weaknesses. The holdup on this fork and the rigidity of this fork is definitely improved over that Fast Ace fork. And I feel like the way this fork is set up right now, perfect for some bigger hits or some flowier stuff. I might soften it up a little bit for this type of riding, just because I personally like a really plush initial part of the stroke in kind of choppy terrain. I just want the bike to soak that stuff up and feel plush, and I can deal with it kind of bottoming out a little bit. But yeah, thoroughly, genuinely impressed right now so far with this setup. And you can't just attribute it all to the suspension. I have to say, putting a 21/18 Warp 9 wheel set on here with the tires that I really like to run, to me, that gives me more confidence. I just like that bigger wheel size. I think it rolls over stuff better. And You also get more rubber, can run a lower PSI, and that acts as suspension also. So, something to keep in mind there. So before I change these settings, I think I'm actually going to take this to the pit bike track and go ride that stuff on it. So I think this choppy terrain is honestly just hard to set suspension up on, especially Surron suspension. You don't have the full amount of range to tune, kind of like you do on a moto. So would like to try this setting on the pit bike track as well.
And that is exactly what I did. Although, you'll see here, we got some crazy flooding in Colorado, and 50% of this track is completely underwater. So I was only really able to hit a small, relatively boring part of this track. But in the interim, I actually added one more part, and it's this warp drive chain conversion kit from Warp 9. What's unique about this kit is that the motor and the jackshaft sprockets both have rubber dampener rings that are vulcanized to the sprockets. This is supposed to quiet down or dampen the ringing effect that steel sprockets have. The downside of this is that, yes, it is significantly louder than a belt drive, but you won't have to worry about breaking a belt, which is a concern for a lot of you riders out there. As for the EXT Ferro Fork settings that I'm running, it definitely thrives here in this environment. A little bit faster and less small embedded and loose rocks. This setting feels really good. For my weight and style on the trails, I'd probably lower a few PSI in the main chamber to soften up the top of the stroke while maintaining the mid to the end of the stroke. But that's all personal preference. For those that want to compare the EXT to a Fox 40 like what we were running before, despite the EXT Ferro having 36mm stanchions, they're made of steel, making them much stronger than the aluminum that the other manufacturers like Fox are using. Another important thing to note is that because this is an upside down style fork, the diameter where the lower triple crown clamps to the fork is 46mm, not the 40mm that the Fox 40 is clamping to. All in all, the EXT Ferro has less flex than I was expecting, and that part surprised me.
Alright guys, initial impressions on this new setup is it's right where I want it to be. I'm honestly surprised by the fork. One of the most surprising things about this fork to me is how stiff it feels for the size of the fork. In addition to that, the holdup on this fork is really impressive. I feel like if I'm gonna go ride these trails more, I would like to soften this fork up a bit. I love the holdup that it has, but I personally like a really plush front feeling front end, and especially just in this choppy terrain, I like the front end to feel like it's kind of planted and I can deal with it getting deeper into the stroke and potentially bottoming out. That is something that I'd rather deal with than feeling like the front end is too stiff and I'm feeling every little bump. And so that's just personal preference. Everybody's different. You might like a really stiff feeling fork. That's totally good, but that's the way that I like it. In terms of power, it's still the same for me. Like, I'm pretty happy with this tune. Now that I put the 2118 on it, it is a little bit, lower on power, but for riding trails, I feel like it's totally suitable. Like, I might try to bump the power up just a little bit, so it's not as mellow, but the bike feels great to me. I feel like I'm not held back to go fast or feel connected to the motorcycle. Like, it feels really good, so all the other parts, they're great. The bike's looking good. It's feeling good. 2118 combo's working great. The brakes, like when you put the 2118 on, you really start to feel these mountain bike style brakes feeling like they're at their limit, but all of that, taken into consideration, the brakes, the oversized rotors, all that is feeling good. And yeah, I'm excited to just kind of fine tune this thing a little bit more, but it feels really close. So I'm stoked with it. Hope you guys like this build. Thanks for watching.